Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our new viewers on YouTube as well as our growing audience on Zoom. We're very, very grateful for your interest and continues to grow and intensify as we get closer to this climax of the 2020 election. We're very, very grateful for our news analysts who are continuing with us right up through the election. Things are happening really, really quickly. Again, if you're new to Zoom, let me do a little administrative work. The Q&A button does work. We do respond to your questions at the end of the program. Mary is behind the scenes right now, but she'll be coming on with her analysis, her monitoring and presenting of the questions for Christine. Tonight, we have one of our rotating news analysts, Christine Douglas-Williams. We are so grateful for her professionalism and her commitment to be with you on a regular basis on our program. Christine, thank you so much.
Dick, it's such an honor to be back again. Thanks for having me.
And you bring a very special perspective. So let me just ask you a question. We wonder how the world looks at America as we put on the gloves and get in the ring and start punching each other in the face with uppercuts and foul play, below the belt punches. Will Canadians watch the debate tomorrow night? What do you think?
Oh, I'm sure it's going to be very popular here in Canada. One thing has been steady and certain throughout the ages of recent times, at least. America is a huge player on the global front. Whatever happens in America is going to affect Canada. It's going to affect the rest of the world, period. And although Canada and America try to say, oh, we're such different people, well, in some ways, because after all, we are the United Empire loyalists by origin. Okay, so, but Canadians watch sometimes obsessively what's going on in the States. And the same, what you would call heated debates you hear about Trump in the States, you're hearing the same thing exactly over here in Canada on either side of the fence. So there's no real difference going on in Canada, no matter what you might be hearing over there. We just wish you guys in the States would pay more attention to Canadian politics. We're bitter about that.
Okay, well, we appreciate you've been really good at keeping us, giving us slices of life north of the border and how they reflect to what's going on here. Just curious, like, does the American media certainly is slanted. Is the Canadian media any different? Is there a more balance in the coverage in Canada, or is it pretty much like in America where the left pretty much monopolizes the media?
It's very similar, but I am proud to say that we're not as bad over here. For instance, we know about the coined phrase fake news coming out of the States on a routine basis. The hatred for Trump, the venom against him is absolutely obscene. So that even when there is highly negative news going on about Biden over there, you guys are downplaying that while a lot of lies keep on getting perpetrated against Trump. In Canada, we still have traditionally leftist media that really go after Trudeau on occasion. They may not continue it the way some of the right, although we don't have many right-wing media left here in Canada. It's more like rebel media and the alternate media. But in Canada, it's not as bad. You do get some truth in there, but we still have definite problems when it comes to the left and when it comes to this whole issue in particular of political correctness, appeasement, the globalism, the same thing that you see with the left on a global basis. We have exactly the same thing in Canada. And in some ways, the culture that way is worse. But in terms of the media, we're not quite as bad as what we're seeing. At least I don't think so in the States. Some might disagree. I don't think we're the same, because I do see some serious attacks on Trudeau in the mainstream media here.
So we have the day-to-day bombshell and the day-to-day reaction to various things, including the president's appointment or his putting forth a name for the Supreme Court judge. So why don't you begin your analysis and we'll follow along. And it does seem like the Supreme Court issue is one of the top topics.
Well, thank you for that, Dick, because that's exactly the first point I'm going to start on. So you introduced it nicely. So I'm just going to go right to it now. So as we know, the top news is that Trump has nominated Amy Coney Barrett to replace the RBG on the Supreme Court. Now, Barrett has 7 kids, and I'm going to start off at a very sad point, because I'm going to get right to it. This lady is being attacked left, right, and center. So she has 7 kids, but that includes 2 adopted children from Haiti. Already, Twitter is ablaze. They're slamming her for playing them for politics. Now, I sent Dick and Mary a couple of graphics just so that you guys could have a little bit of a look as to some of what's being said. And believe me, okay, you see it up there on the screen. There are 2 of them there. And when you see that kind of conversation going back and forth, it's absolutely ridiculous. This lady's being called every name in the book. She's being accused of having white privilege and forcing that upon the children. And they're saying things like, why don't they check out the adoption? Because some of these adoptions were illegal adoptions. So they're not stopping to say the lady's just plain kind. And she decided to embrace these children as her own. They're accusing her of parading them, which is the worst form of attack. And as far as I'm concerned, racism as well. But people don't see it that way, but it is. Okay, so I'm gonna get off my high horse here and get into the subject matter about the appointment. Now, her Supreme Court confirmation hearings, in case you're interested, which I'm sure you are, many of you are going to be glued to the internet watching it, and it starts on October 12th. So here's how the system goes. She has to face the Senate Judiciary Committee for what's going to be a very contentious process. We know that, and this is what we expect. The process follows the same kind of a framework as the previous 2 Supreme Court confirmation hearings under the Trump administration. I'll recap that shortly. But that means Barrett's hearings are going to last 4 days. She'll be giving opening statements. She'll field questions from senators, and she'll be listening to testimony from outside witnesses. Then she's going to be challenged. Now, we can anticipate what that might look like, but in advance, Senator Lindsey Graham, he's forewarned the snakes out there, quote, if they treat Judge Barrett like they did Justice Kavanaugh, it's going to blow up in their faces big time, unquote. And I think he's right. So getting into the significance of all this, especially for Canadians who may be watching that might not be as familiar. 9 justices make up the current Supreme Court, 1 Chief Justice and 8 associate justices. And the Supreme Court has not been this conservative since the 1930s. So if Judge Barrett is placed on the court by the Republican-controlled Senate, and she is expected to, Trump would have actually named in total since his presidency 1/3 of the Supreme Court and solidified a 6-3 conservative majority. Very important. To recap, Barrett is the 3rd conservative judge nominated by Trump to the Supreme Court. The 2 others nominated and confirmed were Neil Gorsuch in 2017 to succeed Scalia. Then in June 2018, Associate Justice Anthony Kennedy announced his retirement, creating a 2nd vacancy on the Supreme Court. Then shortly after that, Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh as his replacement, and Kavanaugh was confirmed in October 2018. Seems much longer ago, but that's when it was. Huge implications with these 3 justices appointed by Trump. They mark a dramatic ideological turnaround the court has seen in such a short space of time in generations. Barrett's appointment also ensures a conservative slant for decades to come, long after Trump is out of the White House. So it's very significant. Note, a case brought to end Obamacare is to be argued at the Supreme Court a week after the election. We know how important Obamacare is to the Democrats. Democrat Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer said Saturday night that, quote, a vote for Amy Coney Barrett is a dagger aimed at the heart of the healthcare protections Americans so desperately need and want, unquote. Abortion rights will likely play a big role in the hearings. The fear for the Democrats is that Barrett will vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. So brace yourself, October 12th, and pray for Barrett if you believe in prayer. Another top story, the first presidential debate is on Tuesday, and you don't want to miss it. Or I don't know, when you consider some of what we're hearing about Biden, just to get a glimpse. I've got this clip that most of you have probably watched, but we have it for you. If that one's ready, let's take a look at
it. And perhaps most cruelly of all, if Donald Trump has his way, the complications from COVID-19, which are well beyond what they should be. It's estimated that 200 million people have died, probably by the time I finish this talk.
200 million by the time you finish the talk? Wow, that's 61% of the American population. In Trump's opinion, quote, Joe is lost. Joe is lost. We can have a president that is mentally lost, unquote. Be sure to watch Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Okay, as we know, the Democrats never give up. So no matter how absurd, they don't. Time and money has already been wasted on a Russian collusion scam, an impeachment proceeding based on a scam. Expect the knives to come out, and even more viciously as election day approaches. The newest, a headline from the old New York Times, quote, long concealed records show Trump's chronic losses and years of tax avoidance, unquote. So keep an eye on that. That was breaking news, I believe, yesterday, but it's really starting to move today. A note about the Democrats, too, just to show you how low they're willing to go. At the Democrat convention in mid-August, that was actually August the 19th, they used their convention to prod Americans to welcome in sick migrants who enter the U.S. in search of American health care. In this economy to boot. Now, when I say migrants, I'm talking illegals here. They featured a video of an illegal migrant who brought her disabled grown daughter into the US for a life-saving healthcare treatment. Americans save the child was the message, but cannot yet cure her illness that keeps her confined to a wheelchair. Ms. Sanchez, the grown daughter, told the Democrat audience, I don't have the right ID, so I can't get health insurance through the Obamacare exchange. I need health insurance. I deserve it, right? Of course you do, her mother said in Spanish. We all deserve hope, a good life and health, unquote. But are American children and Americans on the whole getting it? Dems also featured Donna Hilton, that's Hylton, a 55-year-old Jamaican-American who was convicted of murder and kidnapping. She was also implicated, and I can't talk about that here, it's too disgusting, but she was also implicated in a gruesome 1985 torture and killing case. But yet she was featured as a criminal justice reform advocate. Truth be told, Blacks in the prison system suffered something terrible under the Clinton administration reforms. No one has done more for Blacks than Donald Trump in the criminal justice system. But you don't hear that being talked about anything enough. Making it easier, in fact, on Blacks, this is what he did to reintegrate back into society. He created a system that separated the worst violent criminals from those who are likely not to reoffend, and then get them into programs to help them settle into being productive members of society. The Democrats are openly and unapologetically supporting every vile degeneracy imaginable, and I can't tell you how many Christians I know say they hate Trump, but when you ask them why, they just get into the name calling and they can't tell you why. Think about the logic of this for a moment. Third world folk lined up to come to America because it's so racist, so oppressive, and the police are hunting down Blacks. Does that really make any sense? America is a land of opportunity where human rights prevail. The Western giant that actually had a Black president. America has evolved remarkably, even miraculously, in a relatively short time from its days of slavery. That shouldn't need to be said, but you've got lots of stupid people out there who only read headlines, unfortunately, whereas Africa gets worse by the day. Blacks killing Blacks wanton. And there's also a problem with high Black crime in the Caribbean, in the inner cities of the US, in the US, in all of those inner cities, and also in Canada. So here you have now this Marxist, anti-nuclear family, violent Black Lives Matter movement running around rampant everywhere, and during coronavirus to boot. America has descended, and with full support from the Democrats, to resemble a third world disordered country in many areas, all in the name of diversity, where Blacks continue to murder Blacks, crime, looting, and violent protests are rampant, and no one is exempt, including young children. It's very sickening. Funny thing too, Democrats also support the abortion promoting Planned Parenthood, where its founder, Margaret Sanger, you may have heard of her, Sanger. She supported eugenics. That is, improving the human race through selective breeding. That's what eugenics entails. And the practices were targeted against the disabled, against Blacks, and poor people. Well, now Planned Parenthood is planning to remove Sanger's name as founder for optics. Well, she is the founder. You see, Planned Parenthood is behind an average of 247 babies aborted a day. Black babies aborted a day. And 3 months ago, it stated via its social media that Black lives matter and justice must be achieved for all Black America, unquote. Black Lives Matter, by the way, has just removed the part on its What We Believe website page calling to disrupt the nuclear family structure. There you have it up on the screen because they removed it recently. And if you look at it there on the right side of your screen, I believe it's the second paragraph, you'll notice it. Just read through that and we can keep that there so you could take a look at it for a bit. And we're also going to show you a clip in about a minute that is downright scary. And it exposes where the anti-racism industry and diversity programs are headed. I warned about this in my second book that was published by the Center for Security Policy. And it was edited by someone you know very well, Claire Lopez. It's called Fired by the Government of Canada. And I talked about this red-green axis and where the anti-racism industry was going. It's very alarming. In fact, conservative parents have had a jaw-drop moment, several moments actually, during this coronavirus lockdown, because many finally got to see what their child was actually learning. But take a look at this particular clip. It's weird. And I cannot imagine young kids being exposed to this, but it could be your child and they are being exposed to it. So take a look at this clip.
At the Thomas Jefferson School for Science and Technology in Alexandria, probably the best public school in the United States, officials are eliminating their merit-based admissions system. Why? In the name of diversity. They've replaced a rigorous application process with a random lottery system. Will the school survive? No, of course not. It will not be the best school in the country. They just wrecked it. In a few years, there might not be any top schools left in this country. Critical race theory, though, will probably flourish, and that's the whole point. Why are we letting this happen to our children? Max Eden is a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute. He joins us tonight. Max, thanks so much for coming on. How widespread is this poison? And it is poison.
Yeah, you know, Tucker, it's hard to get a good grasp at exactly how widespread it is. You see things on social media. You would like to think they're anecdotes, but when you see a school district like Buffalo just put that out there as though they're proud of it, it's cause for deep alarm. I mean, that came from the school district's Department of Culturally Responsive Education, right? And New York State adopted statewide standards in culturally responsive education, the architect of which was an education professor who has literally said that it is white supremacism to expect Black students to read and speak American Standard English. Just the other week, another superintendent in New York said that we shouldn't teach the success stories of Black Americans because doing so somehow denies or undercuts the ideas of systemic racism. I think we can expect that this is, full-on states have committed to it. Individual teachers who have a sense of social justice defined by critical race theory are going to take it into their own hands, even if it's not necessarily on the school district's website.
So let's get to the core idea that I think we should work to fight, and that is the idea of blood guilt. The idea that some people are born with guilt, some people are born inferior, some people are born superior. We rejected that as a nation a long time ago. We have a monument on the Mall as a testament to the fact we reject it. How common is that lie in our schools?
Yeah, well, I think this really ties into the 1619 Project, which you discussed the falsehoods of it, but I think the audience needs to realize this isn't just being adopted in major school districts. Teachers are taking it into their own hands. And the true purpose of this, according to Nicole Hannah-Jones, is to advance reparations. And she has said further from that that's her goal because she decided that it was more realistic than, and I quote, "How can we stop white Americans from being white?" Now, curriculum can't affect skin color, what this is about is what you're saying. It's about blood guilt. It's about this critical ideology that takes things that you and I and most Americans think are virtues, things like the nuclear family, things like a sense of urgency, delayed gratification, defines them as whiteness and tells your kids that it's your job to dismantle white supremacism.
They have no right to do this. They have no right to destroy our children. They have no right to destroy our schools. And soon we're gonna put an email address on our screen starting tomorrow and going forward. For any parents who've seen examples of this, please send them to us. I agree with you, Max, that this is likely ubiquitous, and until we know its extent, we really can't fight against it, which we should do. Maxine, I hope you'll come back. Thank you.
Yeah, we'd love to. Thank you.
That's absolutely obscene. There are many people that ask me, so you don't believe racism exists? Well, of course racism exists. It exists everywhere, but it's not just white people against everybody. If you look at the world over, the white people, as they put it, are the ones that have grown the most by leaps and bounds, ending slavery and getting to the point of a Black president. You've got countries that, due to religion, for example, Black on Blacks, you're seeing in, what am I talking about, Black on Blacks? Yes, they're killing each other. But in addition to that, you're also looking at Black slavery. We're Arabs. We're talking Libya here, Algeria, Mauritania, Sudan. They're holding Black slaves. Why is the world not in upheaval over this? Why are liberals continuously talking about white people did this and did that? White people are to blame for the behavior that we see of Islamic supremacists and the rage that we see. This is 1400 years in the works when we see what went on with Islamic conquest through the ages. That was way before colonialism. And this bigotry of low expectations where white people are the ones that put everybody in chains and therefore nobody is culpable is ridiculous. I don't know personally any Black person that is close to my circles that doesn't appreciate what North America has accomplished by leaps and bounds, because if anybody is honest with themselves, they'll know exactly what's going on in the Caribbean. They'll understand about the Black on Black crime there as well as everywhere else, but they pull the wool over the eyes of globalists and far leftists. Right now, we're in a process of dismantling achievements. When you look at the racism that also exists between groups, the Chinese are very racist. And I'm not talking all, I never mean everybody. But as a whole, there's a lot of racism in China against Blacks. There's a lot of colorism going on in India with the caste system. The dark Indians are valued much less than the lighter colored Indians. And in a day of multiculturalism, and I'm not talking necessarily enshrined multiculturalism like we have here in Canada, where it's in the Constitution. I'm talking about other countries like America, who has opened its doors to a lot of immigrants, so you have a lot of diversity and a lot of multicultures. That's the kind of multiculturalism I'm talking about. These countries, America, Canada, throughout Europe, we're seeing lots of different races, lots of different cultures, and the prejudices and the racism and the intolerance that exists is disgraceful, but it's not being addressed. Even anti-Semitism is not being addressed, and it's soaring, violent anti-Semitism across Europe, and it's being found to be correlated with Muslim migration based on texts about Jews. Now, this is something that becomes a really thorny issue, but the fact is the fact. We see what's going on with Israel when Israel was given a state and how the Arab states surrounded her and tried to obliterate Israel. I'm not going to get into that because there's no time to get into this. But the point of the matter is stats have been conducted and there is a correlation between Islamic anti-Semitism, the rise of it, with the influx of the refugees that went to Europe. So we're seeing problems with diversity, intolerance everywhere, but somehow Black Lives Matter, despite their inner cities, are being allowed to tear up America, a jewel that everybody seems to want to come and live in. This is atrocious. And should the Democrats with that kind of policy get in, God help us, that's all I can say. So I'm going to continue because I'll just go on for the entire hour. So moving over to Canada now. On my last briefing in August, I discussed the possibility of a fall election because Parti Québécois leader, he threatened to bring down the Trudeau government. Yves-François Blanchet. He told the House of Commons that he was going to soon present a non-confidence motion to bring down the Liberal government unless Trudeau, Canada's Finance Minister Bill Morneau, and Trudeau's Chief of Staff Katie Telford all quit. Why? Corruption, plain and simple. A string of issues. The latest in May was the We Charity scandal, a charity personally linked to Trudeau. It received multiple sole source contracts from the Liberal government, that is, the taxpayers. The federal Liberal government outsourced a student grant program worth over $900 million to We Charity, which would receive at least $19.5 million in fees for the work. Well, that's since been dismantled because of the public scandal. A lot of taxpayers' money went for this charity, and yet there was no paper trail, and Trudeau's family members, namely his mother and his brother, received $283,400 to speak at events hosted by We Charity. Trying to figure out what these people were doing was a wild goose chase, and the investigation has continued. Example, giving foreign aid to Kenya, to Haiti, but those same tax figures show that We Charity, having just one employee, contractor, or agent in 6 of 7 countries outside of North America. In the 7th, Ecuador, none is listed. Canada was listed as having more than 200 employees, and the contracts were given, were very, very vague for services. What is known is that We Charity is a left-leaning diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism venture, but specific work remains vague to this day, even after investigations in taxes, and doesn't quite account for the exorbitant price tag. So in light of that, plus the SNC-Lavalin scandal, Trudeau's unethical family Aga Khan Island trip, this disgraceful trip to India that led to public embarrassment and questions about Trudeau's link to the Khalistani movement, the government still stands. So how did Trudeau dodge that bullet at the time? Well, he prorogued Parliament, which means all government proceedings before Parliament died. With certain exceptions, all unfinished business just simply dies when Parliament is prorogued. Trudeau spends Canada's hard-earned money as though it's his own, unfortunately, however he pleases. Now, this brings us to COVID-19. Of course, Canadians who have suffered have been more than happy to get a monthly check of $2,000 via the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. Many of you know it as CERB, C-E-R-B. But CERB expires at the end of the month, so in a couple of days. So what's next? According to CTV National News out of Canada, the Liberals tabled Bill C-2 to implement the new benefits as Prime Minister Trudeau's Liberal minority seeks opposition support to avoid a snap election during a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. The $37 billion CERB transition plan includes moving most of the millions of Canadians collecting CERB into an updated benefit meant to be more specifically targeting the reasons why Canadians who are not working, or to cover those who don't qualify for employment insurance benefits. So it's not just automatic anymore. You're supposed to go over to employment insurance benefits, but if you somehow don't qualify, to make a long story short, there are a couple of other programs to try to figure out why you don't qualify and how that income can get to you so that you don't lose your shirt in the process of coronavirus. So who's paying for all this? Well, not everyone collectively, as we should be when we're trying to climb out of this hole. Quote, the extremely wealthy, according to the Trudeau government, whatever that means. In addition, Justin Trudeau's government also announced on top coronavirus spending, which that part's understandable, but he also announced an ambitious plan to spend billions of dollars on childcare, on housing and healthcare, just as Canada braces for a second wave of coronavirus. And there's more spending on top spending by Trudeau. In addition, again, it all came spilling out during the throne speech last week. That throne speech, by the way, was very critical. In fact, the Liberals needed the support of at least one of the major opposition parties, which in Canada is the NDP and the Conservatives, for the minority government to survive a confidence vote. And he got it from the NDP, thus averting a no confidence vote again, and thus a snap election. Back to his spending, Trudeau says that his government has reached an agreement with a UK-based pharmaceutical company called AstraZeneca to secure 20 million doses of a potential vaccine if clinical trials are successful. It's being developed with the University of Oxford. Plus, in addition to previously announced agreements with a number of other companies, including Johnson & Johnson, and some of you have heard of this, Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, Sanofi, and GlaxoSmithKline, Canada is expected to have access to a total of 282 million vaccination dosages. Now, the population in Canada is 37.7 million, so it's for developed countries as well. Canadians are paying for this. The extreme wealthy, by the way, $440 million of it is being poured into something called the COVID-19 Vaccine Global Access, in short, COVAX. So a global initiative is aimed at working with vaccine manufacturers, and half of that 440 million is to benefit Canadians, but the other half will provide doses for people in developing countries. And again, taxpayers are paying for this sequence of endless spending. Trudeau actually sees this COVAX initiative as, quote, the world coming together. It's all part of a globalist plan. And let's not forget, too, that Trudeau has not let go of the UN Migration Pact to see hundreds of thousands of migrants flowing into Canada and hop to the end of the queue on all benefits from healthcare, education to job placements. The US, by the way, is not participating in COVAX. Many other nations are. A brief point concerning COVID-19 in the US, it's widely reported that more than 7 million cases of COVID-19 as of Friday was tabulated. You can believe it or not. And leading experts are now saying to brace for a renewed surge in coming months, and that the US death toll from the virus may almost double by January 1st amid a major winter surge, according to a projection by the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington. The reason? A restriction wearing public, wearing masks and staying at home less. Weary, by the way. Canada, US border, by the way, is not expected to open anytime soon. Canada has been strong on that. Moving on, concerns about Canada's new opposition leader, Erin O'Toole. He's the new leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. Now, I spoke a while back about Erin O'Toole's campaign chair, Walid Soliman, who advocates for Sharia finance and was recognized in an award by the Muslim Association of Canada, a self-declared Muslim Brotherhood organization. Now that O'Toole has won, he's being pressured heavily by two groups in particular. Unsurprisingly, one is the Muslim Association of Canada, and the other is, again unsurprisingly, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, formerly CARECAN. And we know the story about CARECAN that gets its roots from CARE, and CARE is an unindicted conspirator to jihad terror. And that, of course, was established during the largest terrorism funding trial in America, the Holy Land Foundation trial. So you can read the details at Front Page Magazine and Jihad Watch, where I wrote a long article about it and why every conservative Canadian should be very worried about O'Toole, that he will indeed be easily manipulated, since also, well, given his past, but also the one before him, Andrew Scheer, was also easily manipulated. And even though he was, and I had spoken about that on other briefings, and I've also written about it, he was still deemed to be Islamophobic by these groups. You could never do enough for them. They want supremacy. The emphasis of the Muslim Association of Canada is the Muslim vote. And for the NCCM, they have always been very focused on the Islamophobia canard. And we've also dealt with this subject matter many times here, that it's pushed by the Organization of Islamic Cooperation and by such sinister states like Turkey, because it's intended to shut down free speech of the West. Never forget what the Pakistani leader Imran Khan once said when he was referring to Geert Wilders' cartoons, that nobody in the West could ever understand the pain of such actions against Muslims. But the point of the matter is, every religion sucks it up. Every religion has borne insult after insult, and they don't erupt in violence and killings and start asking for special privileges. So on a different note now, because I'm going to make an about face here about Erin O'Toole, he actually wrote a piece. It was quite an interesting piece, actually, in the National Post last week, and he did it about China. In that piece, he was pledging that he will stand up for China, against China for Canada's interest if he does become the next Prime Minister of Canada. But he also quoted something rather disturbing in the article about a quote by Trudeau years ago when he was campaigning to become Prime Minister back in 2015. So here's what he said, quote, "When campaigning to become the Prime Minister in 2015, Justin Trudeau was asked what country he most admired. The people in attendance at the event looked on in disbelief when he stated that he most admired China. His reason? Trudeau believed China's basic dictatorship allowed its government to more swiftly to implement its agenda," unquote. Very, very disturbing. Moving over to Europe, the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. In fact, I did an interview with Frank Gaffney over this on his Secure Freedom Radio. This is an important point that a lot of people have missed, or they don't understand maybe the significance of it. This woman proposed last week abolishing the current European Union asylum rules called the Dublin Agreement, which is actually an EU law that states, quote, "Asylum seekers must apply for asylum in the first European Union member state that they enter," unquote. But the EU is moving toward redistributing the migrants all over Europe, and it will likely succeed. Throwing out the Dublin Agreement is really only a formality. It's really not new when it comes to its very principle. The aim of what von der Leyen calls a new strong solidarity mechanism is nothing more than a move consistent with the UN Migration Pact, which established open doors all across the EU to welcome in as many economic migrants from Africa and the Middle East as possible who wish to come in. The thinking is that the EU needs to replace declining birth rates to sustain its heavy tax welfare system. That's the thinking of the globalists. However, the peaceful, persecuted Christians are ignored completely, well, virtually, except by Hungary, by the way, who pours in millions into helping them in Iraq and Syria. The problem is that open doors in the EU has brought a crisis of high crime, chaos, the proliferation of Salafi preachers, and we have discussed this extensively on Jihad Watch, a heightened threat of jihad, to no-go zones, because we see those across Europe. We also see Sharia patrols, Muslim rape gangs in the UK, and even jihadist gangs from Somalia, not to mention a surge of Islamic anti-Semitism. And again, that's a topic on its own. It's very bad. A cancellation of the Dublin Agreement amounts to legitimizing illegal migration in full accordance with the previously agreed upon the UN Migration Pact. Remember that the pact raised much controversy, but it was never actually abandoned. It just went on to the back burner when a surprising number of nations rejected it. Some outright, like the United States, Israel, and Hungary, and others refused to sign it. Even during the coronavirus pandemic, invasions have continued, particularly into Italy, Greece, and the UK. A very important point to note, in fact, to demonstrate why this proposal to abolish the Dublin Agreement was very calculated and very dangerous. On August 20th, it was reported by the UK Guardian that EU negotiators in Brexit talks rejected a British request for an immigration pact that would allow the British government to return asylum seekers to other European countries. This means that when the Brexit transition period expires, and that's at the very end of this coming December, the UK will lose the right to transfer refugees and migrants to the EU country where they first arrived, in accordance with the Dublin Agreement. So in effect, EU member states have actually ruled out a British plan to recreate the Dublin system outside the EU. That's just crazy. Now, a little bit more about the Migration Pact. Last year, a report by the European Commission's legal service declared that the UN Compact should have legally binding consequences for every EU member state, indicating that those who withdrew from the agreement will face consequences, meaning penalties. Hungary and Poland have faced relentless bullying during the height of the migration crisis. And when we saw this illegal migration flowing through, they closed their borders, they built fences, and they were dragged to EU court and bullied, but they held their ground. Expect other tension and showdowns as well. The Austrian government has made it clear also that it will not accept new migrants. And Hungary's prime minister has reiterated. In fact, he vowed 6 months ago to protect Europe from renewed Muslim migration. He makes no bones about it. He comes right out and says that he does not want to change the Christian constitution of his country. So he vowed to protect it. So going over to what's happening very briefly in Greece, Italy, and the UK. In Italy, 11,000 migrants arrived in a single week. In another report in that same week, in early August, over 130 migrants out of 293 migrants that the leftist Italian coalition government had relocated to a reception center in northern Italy tested positive for coronavirus, for COVID-19. So again, 130 out of the 293. Italy's former Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini warned that Europe risked becoming an Islamic caliphate given the flood of illegal migrants that are swarming into Italy from North Africa. In Greece, the Greek government has claimed to have stopped over 50,000 migrants from entering the country. Most there are from Syria. A Greek resident of the island of Lesbos, to show you how bad it is, filed a complaint after discovering illegal migrants had built a makeshift mosque on her property that is located near a notorious migrant camp. In the UK, in mid-August, over 1,000 illegal migrants crossed the English Channel and arrived into Britain during coronavirus lockdown to boot. We need to remember this, in small rubber dinghies in the space of just 10 days. Brexit party leader Nigel Farage has been calling the growing crisis a national humiliation. And we need to remember that it was open door migration in the first place. And we need to really understand this, that led to the Brexit referendum. So it looks like the EU is doing everything to stop the UK from making its own decisions when it comes to its own sovereignty and return them to the original place that they landed. So they're being denied this. So the Brexit referendum, how's that working? It's not working right now when you look at what's going on in the UK and the migrants that just keep on flowing in. Also, migrants there have been gaming the system. 50 boomerang migrants ended up being granted asylum despite being kicked out previously. And Boris Johnson, very disappointing. This Bojo guy, he's been rather quiet, continuously so, as migrants, many with coronavirus, continue to invade his country illegally, some with help from the French Navy. The migrants coming into Britain from the English Channel are mostly from Iraq, Syria, Kuwait, and Iran. So the changing weather, as expected, is also causing an immediate and sudden surge in the migrants crossing over the English Channel. Thursday alone saw some 431 illegal migrants arrive at a new camp based at a no longer used army barracks in Folkestone, Kent. But the most prominent accommodation for the migrants, in case you're wondering, were hotels. They were shut down to the local people in towns and cities across the country. The practice had become increasingly embarrassing for Boris Johnson's government, especially after a resident at one of the hotels went on a stabbing spree. But Nigel Farage continues to watch and he continues to film and report what is going on. In France, 7,000 police and soldiers were hired to protect Jews for Yom Kippur, as Jews particularly are targeted in hateful Islamic supremacist attacks. Going over to the Middle East now, in the Israeli newspaper, Israel Hayom, Daniel Seaman wrote a brilliant article, in my opinion. Netanyahu, he says, has always been playing 3D chess. In fact, that's the title. It captured the reality of what's going on. While everyone is hailing and praising the UAE, Bahrain, Israel deal, which is nice, we need to ask the real question, though, of how influential are they? Is that deal? First of all, the Saudis have come out and stated unequivocally that they will not normalize relations with Israel unless a peace accord with their brothers, the Palestinians, is achieved with the pre-67 borders, aka the Auschwitz borders. Israel cannot possibly defend itself with the pre-67 borders, plus Judea and Samaria are rightfully Israel's. So, okay, so I'm going to go on about this writer for a moment. What I like about him, though, is his ability to weigh the good and the bad. Okay, for instance, what is very good is that, quote, an Israel-Sunni Muslim axis has quietly, he says, and delicately been put together. And now the Iranians face the reality of an Israeli forward base of operations at their doorstep. And now the Iranians will wake up to the reality of an Israeli forward base of operations that can land them on an immediate blow should the need arise. This is very, very important. We're talking about a base of operations. That is critical. I haven't heard many people talking about it. It's strategic, and this guy mentioned it here. He also says something else that we Westerners need to tattoo someplace unseen. He says, quote, peace and sovereignty are Western terms that have no real meaning in the Middle East. In the neighborhood we live in, Western logic has no meaning. The only thing that has meaning in this region is force, unquote. Israel gets it. Now, when I was in Israel back in November with a contingent from the International Christian Embassy in Jerusalem, Canada, co-sponsored by the Israel Government Press Office, we heard a government speaker after government speaker, and one of them referenced something very interesting. He called it the iceberg relationship between Israel and the Saudis. Bingo. It's what it is. It's a mutual relationship of convenience. One base is based on democracy, which of course is Israel, and the other one Wahhabism. Period. But they share a common enemy and economic strategic goals. The key Islamic players are the Saudis, okay? So when you look at what's really going on here, and you try to measure up the UAE and Bahrain with these other key players, the real key players are the Saudis, the keeper of Sunni Islam, although Turkey is vying for the spot, and some are bold enough to say Turkey has already won it. Then there's Iran, the keeper of Shia Islam. Now, according to the Washington Post, which I do usually take with a grain of salt, as their writers are part of the, what I call the battalion of activist media, but every now and then they do come out with some truth on an issue. So here's a quote from the Washington Post. The UAE and Bahrain did not have diplomatic relations with Israel, nor were they engaged in conflict with it. In fact, they cooperated with Israel silently for years. The actual conflicts in the regions are taking place in Yemen, Syria, Libya, and Lebanon, where the UAE and Saudi Arabia are supporting factions fighting those supported by Qatar, some say Qatar, Turkey, or Iran. The peace accords do not bring us closer to ending these conflicts. If anything, they're likely to deepen them further as the alliance between Israel, UAE, and Saudi Arabia against Iran, so far kept under the table, becomes more assertive, unquote. There's some truth in that. I wouldn't knock it, because if you go back to what the other guy was saying, there is a strategic angle for this as well in terms of the landing strips and the operation, so to speak. But bear that in mind. There's a lot of activity going on that you don't see between these players. The strategic win of the deal also involves Israel and the Arab countries like the UAE and Bahrain drawing closer. So even with the iceberg relations with the Saudis, it really is all a win, especially that their new alliance also involves deepening problems with China and its connection to Iran. Very critical to remember the China factor here. So when you look at what Trump is achieving and what Israel's doing, they are looking down the road. Very, very important in terms of strategy. Watch Turkey especially, bad news there. Erdogan's Turkey has been quite active recently and radically, from its conversion of the Hagia Sophia and its provocations in Greece to its ongoing threats to open the gates of millions, so that millions of Muslim migrants could flood into Europe. Erdogan envisions the recreation of an Ottoman Empire. And he's been actually quite vocal in expressing that since 2014, in fact. Turkey's links to the Islamic State have been repeatedly mentioned. It was discovered then, and it has been repeatedly mentioned in various media. More recently, too, Erdogan has been holding meetings between Turkey, Hamas, and Fatah with an eye toward, quote, inter-Palestinian reconciliation, unquote. Turkey clearly should not belong to NATO, which it does. It should long ago have been thrown out. Erdogan is also meddling in the business of India. India's permanent representative to the UN rebuked Erdogan's criticism of India over Kashmir. And more has now emerged regarding the closeness of Turkey's relationship to the Islamic State again, and a strong support for to the Muslim Brotherhood. Most of you already know this. I'm not sure how many people actually know its relationship with the Islamic State, but with the Muslim Brotherhood, that is historic, but it's tightening given the urgency now with the Abraham Accord. Erdogan has been taking Turkey down a road of Islamization for quite some time. Let's not forget he served as prime minister from 2003 to 2014, so his influence is quite thick and deep, and he won the presidency in 2014, and he still is. Dangerous pattern in Turkey to rival Iran as an enemy. Also recently, Erdogan urged the United Nations to establish an international solidarity day against Islamophobia. Of course, his intent is to try to weaken and ultimately destroy the freedom of speech and ultimately the backbone of democratic freedoms. Now, before Erdogan made his ridiculous request, President Trump and Brazilian President Bolsonaro urged the world to unite against Christophobia. And they're right. There's an actual genocide of Christians going on in Africa and the Middle East, where jihadis on a daily basis are on murder rampages against innocents. An important aside, Nigerian president openly admitted that when he met Trump in 2018, Trump looked him straight in the face, I love this, and said, "Why are you killing Christians?" Now, between Boko Haram and Fulani jihadists, it is very bad for the Christians there. In February, the Trump administration launched the first ever International Religious Freedom Alliance, where 26 countries joined on. That's very positive news. So anyway, going back to Turkey, because I deviated a bit here, and it's an important subject, so I'm going to expand a bit. Hamas, Iran, Turkey, Qatar alliance is strong. This is a very, very important axis of evil. Some points to note. Turkey granted citizenship, passports, and special ID numbers to at least a dozen senior Hamas operatives and their families in mid-August. These operatives are using Turkey as a base of operations for planned terror attacks. The UK Telegraph actually revealed an assassination plot against the mayor of Jerusalem. Hamas reiterates its main goal is to liberate the Palestinians from Israeli occupation and establish an Islamic State. Very key, keeping in mind what the Muslim Brotherhood goals last, establishing an Islamic caliphate. Turkey also purchased not long ago an S-400 missile system from Russia, and Turkey's relations with the Muslim Brotherhood supporting Qatar is very thick. Now, a Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies in Israel article called the Turkish-Qatar relationship, quote, a love in bloom. Qatar has also rushed to Turkey billions of dollars to save the lira's slide in the face of coronavirus. The lira is the Turkish dollar. Plus, trade is flourishing between the two countries. And Gaza's big new friend is Qatar. No surprise, since Qatar is tight with the Muslim Brotherhood, which, by the way, is and funding the expansion of the Muslim Brotherhood in the EU. And of course, we know Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood. So beware and be aware of all these ties. Qatar also brokered an Israel-Hamas ceasefire in Gaza at the end of August, where Palestinian rockets and daily retaliations by Israel was escalating. Although Egypt tried, it was Qatar that succeeded. It has deep interests and loyalties to the Palestinians. Plus, Egypt's normalization of relations with Israel is frowned upon, especially now with the Abraham Accord. Qatar is also pouring money into Gaza. It pledged $34 million to prevent a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip, including $7 million extra for those affected by coronavirus. Qatar is also supplying the Ministry of Health in Gaza with 20,000 testing kits. In Iran, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro is now looking into buying missiles from Iran. In May, and I talked about this, Iran supplied gas to Venezuela to ease chronic shortages. The two countries have been expanding trade and tightening its relationship amid the US sanctions program. Other news, Iran deported, weird, nearly 40, in fact, it's not really weird when you think about it, nearly 40,000 refugees back to Afghanistan in August alone. And a lot of people aren't aware of this. It was an Iranian dissident in Canada that told me this, that Afghans are sitting in the back of the bus in Iran. That's another diversity issue that we just don't address in the Western world. In Tunisia now, surprising, but Tunisia is making efforts to control the flow of illegal immigrants into the European Union, all while globalist leaders are doing absolutely nothing to stop them. A whopping 15,000 illegals from Tunisia and Libya have arrived since the new year, according to Italy's Interior Ministry. So in August, the interior minister asked Tunisia to stop the uncontrolled flow of people. But there's kind of like a double thing going on there, because Italy is also an open door, has become an open door state with its leftist coalition. But at the same time, it still went and asked Tunisia to try to control it, what Tunisia is actually doing. Some more good news, and I'm gonna, well, almost end on this. And it's about Zoom that I'm now speaking on. Zoom canceled the presentation of a webinar of jihadist terrorist Leila Khalid, who was scheduled to address San Francisco State University. She's a member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and she hijacked an El Al flight 219 on September 6th, 1970. Rodney Kazam was a passenger on that flight, and he was almost killed when she attempted to detonate a grenade when the plane was in flight. Netanyahu Darshan-Leitner, the president of Sharat Hadin, a Tel Aviv-based law firm, has now written to the university on Kazam's behalf, and woe be unto them. This lady is a tough one. I've had the privilege of interviewing her and speaking to her on many occasions, and had the privilege to share the stage with her at a speech. Shame on San Francisco State University for aiding and abetting such terror. And on that note, I have to say, kudos to Zoom. Now, to end this webinar, I'd like to show you something really positive, something that should have made it to the news everywhere. And it was being called it was a major caravan, and it's being called that, the caravan for Trump. So I want you to take a look at this. These are Cubans who support Donald J. Trump, despite the us versus them mentality of the Democrats. Take a look at this video that media did not share.
Si no lo ven en Facebook, más de 4.000 carros o 5.000, yo no sé, y siguen entrando. Dios mío, mira para eso, como está esa calle entrando carros todavía por la calle. O sea, no podemos salir hasta que no entren todos los carros, que no podemos.
volunteers putting in their 2 cents and their little contributions to making sure that we show that this is the result of what how Florida feels about Trump on the polls and all the other things that these leftist folks are trying to do. It's ridiculous. Okay, I want to see a Joe Biden rally like this. I want to see a Joe Biden caravan. I guarantee you there'll be about 10 people here. Okay, so this is why I'm doing it. I'm doing it for Donald J. Trump. I'm doing it for this country because right now he's a symbol of the only thing that stands between us and socialism. All right, and I know that very well.
Did you ever expect this many people to come out here?
Yes, sir. And I'm going to tell you why I expected this many people to come out here. Because there was an 80-something% chance of rain, and I had people calling me left and right, telling me to cancel today, that nobody was going to come. But I know that God is on our side, and what is transpiring here today is not the result of Ariel or any other organization here. We all pulled together to do this. But I believe that we have a destiny in America. I believe that God has chosen this land for us to be the beacon of light through the world. And so I believe that God is the one that's doing this, not me. And all the glory be to him.
Do you think it's important for people to come out like this for a rally like this?
I believe it's absolutely important because it shows people that they can speak without fear. It shows people that they can act without fear. It shows people that they're not alone. It gives them courage. It lets them know that this is still America and that what you see on CNN is not the reality. That at least in South Florida here, we're not going to tolerate anarchists. We're not going to tolerate BLM. We're not going to tolerate any of these things. That here in South Florida, we're patriots and we're going to elect this man.
Thank you so much, sir. You have a good
Now that's wonderful. What really, this irks me, we don't hear these voices, the voices of the Cubans. India gave Trump the same kind of welcome. It's a star welcome. And Trump is very much supported by a large sector of the visible minority population, which completely has no voice with these so-called diversity pushing liberals, racist people. This intersectionality and political posturing and making it look like they care is what they're about. They're about anger, aggression, socialism, manipulation. But when it comes to really helping and the cause of true diversity, which means everybody's voice, let's sit and talk and have a real discussion. They're not about that. They're not anywhere about that. So we saved that clip to show you last and hope that in this next coming election in November that, well, we know what we hope. Okay, so hopefully here, Dick and Mary, you're on board to come back in because that's all I have to say. I'm silencing myself now, Dick.
Okay, well, you deserve a little bit of a break for sure, but I know we've got some questions. I think one of the benefits of your visibility is your worldview. And I guess for me, one of the things I wanted to pick up on was the conversation about the Middle East. Mary, you've got a question from one of our really astute people on the Middle East and OIC. I'll let you look for that and I'll kind of ask a related question. One of the things that, who knows, maybe Donald Trump is smart enough to come up with a ploy that will split the Middle East, the Arabs, and maybe that's an interesting thing. Who knows whether that's done on purpose or not, but it is showing. You basically have groups that are afraid of each other, even though they're all Arabs, even though most of them are all Sunnis. And so you've got this situation. I guess one of the things I wanted to just comment, you mentioned Erdogan and his activism. He is on fire. He's spending money, sending troops, if I understand it right, and I think you covered it on Jihad Watch, to Syria, to Libya, refugees into Europe. At the UN, he speaks about a international day of solidarity against Islamophobia, etc. He criticizes India for their criticism, their attacks on Muslims. Of course, he attacks America. He supports Black Lives Matter. What he doesn't ever do is criticize China. And as we know, and you pointed out, China on a regular basis has a persecution effort against 2 million or more Muslims in China. So he lets that go unspoken about because it doesn't fit his agenda. By the way, the other thing that's happening is that the world powers are aligning with the different groups in the Middle East. So China has signed a massive agreement, right, with Iran, and now a massive agreement with Turkey. So Erdogan is the ultimate political leader who wants to rule the world, in my opinion, and he certainly wants to rule much of the Middle East. He wants to be the head of the worldwide caliphate. So I want to thank you for spending time to kind of put all these pieces together. Erdogan is really dangerous, wouldn't you say?
Well, he's aggressive. And the point about what he's doing, the money, he's not really spending much money because they've had trouble. It's Qatar that's doing it.
Yeah.
Qatar, some people say they're the
Yes.
ones that are spending the money
Yes.
to rescue Turkey, and Turkey is the mouthpiece. He's very aggressive and he knows how to wield his power and do it well. He's also very much meddling with the situation going on in Libya. So we also need to keep a watch on that. But this is a dangerous man because you were saying, according to how you feel, and it looks that way, that he wants a global caliphate. He has made no secret that he seeks a global caliphate. He wants the reestablishment of the Ottoman Empire, while Iran wants Persian Empire. So the two of them, Sunni and Shia, well, we know their divisions, and a lot of people don't realize that since 1948, the 12 million Muslims have been killed by their co-religionists for not being Muslim enough. So we do see that divide, and we see it throughout history. And I'm also seeing a question there, Dick, where some is asking about the glue that holds the OIC together while the animosity exists between Turkey and allies. What is the glue that holds them together? The Organization of the Islamic Cooperation. The glue that holds them together is Islamic doctrine, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And they don't function in isolation. There are huge other groups and lobbies internationally, these Islamic fiqh authorities and societies that are constantly out there when it comes to being the keeper of Islamic doctrine, including when you look at Al-Azhar University in Cairo. That is a biggie. So that is really the glue that's holding them together. What we're seeing here in terms of division, that isn't new. That has existed throughout history in Islam. What is really troubling today is the fever pitch of what we see happening. And again, you could argue that happened in history. But what is even more scary is that never before have we seen in history that the major religions are saying, we're in the end times. Christians say the way the world is setting up, we look like we are headed toward the end times in terms of prophecy. The Jews are saying the same thing in terms of the Messiah, that we're at the end times and the Messiah is coming back, but so are the Muslims. They're saying the Mahdi is returning. And the scary part is Iran takes it upon itself to bring disaster to usher in the Mahdi. So that's something to watch out for. When you have a madman that has nothing to lose, he will take you out if he sees where he has no hope. He has nothing to lose. So that's something to watch for.
Well, I think while we're on that topic, and I'm glad you rounded out the conversation by bringing in the view, even the biblical view. One of the things that I'm aware of now is the notion that these catastrophes that could be coming, whether they're related to the Bible or not, geopolitical things, require the unification of Europe under one leader. Well, if you have a curiosity about who could ever unite Europe, one of the things I think it was in one of your articles is the notion that there are massive number of people in Europe committed to Turkey. They are from Turkey. They went to Europe to work. They vote in the Turkish elections. They live and attend 900 mosques in Europe that are owned by the Turkish government. And some of the non-Turks that are committed to Turkey go to the 2,000 mosques that are not owned by Turkish government, but they're Sunni mosques and they're in Europe. Well, if you've got mosques, that would be 3,000 mosques. Of course, we don't want to forget, you probably have 5,000 mosques in North America, many of them Sunni, many of those committed to the same Turkish government, directly or indirectly. So you have the ability for a single person, whether it's called a fatwa or whatever you want to call it, to activate people who go to mosques multiple times a day to enter the street and be belligerent with the community and basically conquer the neighborhoods around the mosques. You have that in Europe. And sadly, we have allowed that to happen in America. So just focusing on Europe, it is certainly possible that Erdogan could unite Europe through a military activity that would relate to the vast influence that Turkey has in Europe right now. It's actually scary when you think about it. So that's a really interesting dimension. So when you talk about Erdogan, I pay attention because he could be amazingly dangerous.
Now, it's really interesting what you said about scripture, Dick, because I've been really, and I know this is not a religious program, but I've been really reading up a lot over I would say the last couple decades when it comes to scripture, when it comes to prophecy and so on. And I have to say prophecy in quotations, because some of it we can say, well, this applies to this in scripture, but others we kind of assume it means something. But one thing that scripture is very clear about is that there's going to be one unified government, one bloc. And we have assumed that it's Europe. A lot of people have said, a lot of writers have said it's Europe, but let's face it, scripture doesn't really say so. We know that there's going to be one bloc, a global bloc, and we also know that there's going to be a very powerful religious leader that works with this global leader. Yeah. And this religious leader has to be Christian, because it talks about having the lamb's horns or whatever it is. I don't know if you call them horns. I'm not very good at these things. And I did not fail biology, by the way. But it's clear in scripture what is to take place in terms of a global government and in terms of a prophet that seems to be Christian, but we don't know what that body is. We think it's Europe, but we really don't know what it is. So we don't know what will form.
We don't know.
But I agree with you. It looks like Europe. It looks like Europe.
And we don't know who that religious leader is, except we do know, and Mary and I have talked about this regularly, we do know that the Pope is all in for the Abrahamic Family Center, which is a mosque, a Jewish synagogue, and a church. So there's something going on, whether it's the end times or the pre-end times or just a really dark period for people, well, for Christians, let's face it, and Jews. That's just the observation, and the ability that people have to unite the world in reaction to a virus, in reaction to hatred for a particular leader of a Judeo-Christian country, Donald Trump. So it's a scary time. That's why. One last thing, and then we can move on to other things. So we have these massively important people, Turkey and Iran. Iran is loaded with money. We should be talking a little bit about how they could be impacting the US election. And just a comment, I got a chance with some people to study Qatar 5 years ago. Yeah. And I couldn't believe that Qatar is the location for the only office of the US Chamber of Commerce outside of America. So why would the US Chamber of Commerce have an office in Qatar? Well, I always thought the Chamber of Commerce were a bunch of guys that went to lunch once a month. They supported the local hardware store, but really the US Chamber of Commerce, now I understand, is a centerpiece for the global initiative. We don't maybe see that often, but all the big corporations are inside it. So you have a major influence from the Middle East in Qatar, where all the money flows into the US Chamber. Well, the US Chamber delivers lots and lots of funds to candidates. Well, which candidates are the globalists? So what I'm really getting at is the Middle East, with or without the US Chamber, is basically has the opportunity to funnel lots of money for the globalist issue, hiding their Islamic doctrine, just support the globalists. Well, that would include all the major corporations that are supporting Black Lives Matter, etc. So we've got a lot of really macro influences affecting us. Hopefully the US individual voters will have the deciding factor, but there's a lot of international intrigue about what's going to happen in our own election and how that would affect the news you covered about the Middle East. So
yeah, that was well said. Mm-hmm.
Let me just throw in what somebody one of our attendees, Mordecai, just told us. Qatar buys politicians and business people big time.
Yes, so, it does.
Thank you.
Yes, it does.
That was a great comment to add to this.
Well, great comment. Iran does it too. Yeah. Long tentacles into Western territories and interests, and even campuses as well. Very important.
By the way, you've got two major influences in Washington, D.C. that are directly tied to Qatar and to funding. So Mordecai, brilliant comment. Those two organizations are the Brookings Institute, which has an office in Qatar and is very, very powerful influence-wise. And the other one is Georgetown University. Yeah. Georgetown University provides tremendous input into the State Department. Many people who work in the State Department graduated from the Foreign Service School at Georgetown. Oh, by the way, some of them were trained in Qatar. And by the way, two things about Qatar and Georgetown. 100% of the Georgetown budget in Qatar is paid for by the Qatar government. Yeah. It is illegal in Qatar to criticize the government. So you're teaching foreign service people who are going to work at the State Department in a school paid for by Qatar, and you can't say anything bad about Qatar and Islam. So
Bridgetown also, Georgetown also has the Bridgetown Initiative, which,
yes,
sad enough, it was a multi-million-dollar deal with the Saudis, where they perpetuate the Islamophobia canard. And sadly to say, I'm one of their fact sheets, because they work in coordination with Canada as well. Yeah. And this is something where they, of course, Robert Spencer's on it. There are many on our side. That's actually a part of that's listed in the Bridgetown, the Bridge Initiative, not Bridgetown, the Bridge Initiative at Georgetown University. So these organizations they have deep tentacles in a lot of Middle Eastern money. Yeah. And some of these articles, as I mentioned today, you have people working together in these countries that sometimes you wouldn't even expect. Like, a lot of people wouldn't even know that Turkey is working with ISIS. And in an article that I mentioned also, in fact, surprisingly, from the Washington Post, they went so far as to even include Saudi Arabia in that. And that's the point, because Saudi Arabia was actually auctioning off, and this is disgusting, Yazidi sex slaves that were captured by ISIS. So this is the kind of collaboration under the table that you see going on in these countries. You can't trust them.
And in addition to this back and forth with Trump and politics, Mary, we're going to pitch it to you in a minute. I apologize, Mary, for taking so much time. But in the middle of these, let's say clever statesmen, political trade-offs, underlying all of this that unites the Sunnis and the Shia is the commitment to Muhammad. So we keep sometimes forgetting, underneath all of this game playing, these people are very clever, but they're really, the overwhelming thing that drives them every day when they wake up is their commitment to Muhammad, his life, the doctrine, the oppression of women, all of those terrible things that are really an extension of a satanic notion, which is largely what Muhammad was involved with. That's the underlying thing that connects all these people. Even if they're pushing and shoving against each other, they're really after the end of the infidel, the end of the Christian and the Jews.
A caliphate.
Yep.
Well, we also got some comments about the media being tainted as well, and they're highly funded, and that's why we don't have any honest media any longer.
No, sadly. And it's going to get much worse. And I hate saying it, but it's going to get much worse. This is kind of a grace period that we see.
Grace period that's going to go quickly. Well, we've got somebody asking whether or not Ted Cruz is tied to Qatar. Any ideas on that? I seem to have found something back when he was running for president, but it's been so long I couldn't tell you what it was. Do you have any ideas on that, Christine?
I can't. I'm not in a position to make that kind of public accusation. I know that he's been fighting against the Muslim Brotherhood. I know that he's raised it before, that he tried to push the notion of outlawing the Muslim Brotherhood. And in terms of his dealings with that's all I can say. Right. In terms of Qatar and what any involvement with Qatar, I can't assert that.
Yeah, I can't either, because Philip Haney was, he's the one that actually put Philip Haney in the hearing, which was all about the Muslim Brotherhood. So the track record would indicate that Ted Cruz, among others, understands the Muslim Brotherhood. So that would be difficult.
That was my impression. So
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either. Well, you made a comment about the peace and sovereignty are Western terms. And I find that a really interesting thought process in terms of what they're trying to do over in the Middle East. And do you have any ideas on whether the Abraham Accord, and this is where I've heard a little bit on it, has some value in terms of commerce, in terms of travel, in terms of businesses?
It does.
There are some positive sides to it, correct?
There are definite positive sides to it in terms of economics. Definitely, that's non-debatable when you investigate what it entails. It's also positive in terms of dividing these groups, because we could see the outrage that it's caused, and the last thing you need is your enemy to be united against you. So it's good on that level. And it's also good in the sense that, I mean, it's good to see a level of some peace, but the UAE and Bahrain, to normalize relations with Israel, and Egypt has long done it kind of, and And it's all good. It's all good. And yes, there are economic benefits. There are definitely, I would say, and this is what I liked about this article that I talked about, the biggest is the strategic benefits, because world alliances are forming. Sinister world alliances. The world is being divided up right now. So forming alliances that you could agree on. Israel refers to, for example, an iceberg relationship with Saudi Arabia. There's some that are dogmatic and they'll say, you know, when you think about it, they can't agree with us at the deepest level of democracy because they don't practice it. You could say that, yes, but you could also say that with this world today, there are alliances being formed. And even though we see Iran Turkey getting closer and closer, and Iran with China, they certainly don't share the same kind of government, but they have something of interest together. So this Abraham Accord is very good for our side, for our team, as we go forward and try to navigate. It's a chess game on what's going to happen next, because you've got a grave axis of evil forming, and you have to work in the global community with others. And strategically, it is great in terms of military operations and landing strips, so to speak.
Well, we've got somebody asking about a representative in Canada, conservative representative that was very vocal against CARE-CAN. Do you remember who that was?
I didn't speak about any representative vocal against CARE-CAN. What I did speak about, sadly, was the new conservative leader, Erin O'Toole, that unfortunately is being bullied by CARE-CAN and the Muslim Association of Canada. And given his history, there are concerns about that. But for the person that's inquiring, it would be good to read up stories, read up who is for and against these kinds of groups, because make no mistake about it, we know what these groups are, we know what their attachment is, we know their influence, and in the government of Canada, they have a lot of influence. But the worst part now that we're seeing is that they're gaining, and they have gained a lot of influence in the Conservative Party of Canada as well, and that just can't be allowed or tolerated in this country.
Well, that might have been the person they were referencing then. The others were just really appreciative of the car caravan that was, I think that was Miami, right? Down in the Miami area.
Yeah, that was just terrific. That was just terrific.
It was just enlightening, and a few people got tears in their eyes just watching it. So
I can see why.
Yeah,
I can see why.
I did too. I mean, and when you see that kind of car caravan and the boat parades that have been happening for months, how can you believe the polls telling you that they're neck and neck?
You simply can't. You simply can't. It's so sad. Yeah. The lies being told.
The lies, and it's all about fear and control, because they're using fear and control to keep people from going to the polls to vote, instead wanting them to go and do a mail-in voting, and we know there's so much fraud with that. So that would be my final message to everybody. Get out, go to the polls, even if you want to take your mail-in and drop it in yourself. Please do that and don't stay home.
Absolutely.
Well, Christine, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We're going to identify the fact that the clock is ticking. We are getting closer and closer. You will be back with us on October the 19th. We really appreciate someone as busy as you, as committed to all the things you do, all that you produce every workday, to set aside time to be with us right up through the election. So it's interesting. We started the show talking about Canadians' interest in the debate. The debate is tomorrow night. I have a question. This is how silly or uninformed I am. How many debates are there going to be? Do we know? 3?
Oh my goodness. As far as I know, that's a good question. I believe it's 3. Don't quote me on that, double check, but I believe it's 3. I'll back you up for now. It's 3.
Between now and the 19th of October, I bet there might be 2. So we'll pick you up again. We're very gratefully having you with us on the 19th.
Thank you, Dick.
Your analysis of the debates. We do have Claire next week, and then Leo. So we're getting down to the wire. And of course, we're very proud to be able to bring you Mark Christian on the 4th Thursday of this month as well. Any closing comments, Mary, and then maybe Christine?
No,
no, not for me. Not for me.
Just very appreciative.
Hang in there and keep believing.
Okay, we're going to invite everybody to learn, but also to enjoy tomorrow night's debate. and stay healthy and stay committed. The goal is really simple. It's the good guys versus the bad guys. We need to be as active as we can for the remaining weeks before this monstrous, internationally impacting election. So with that, we'll say good night.
Good night,
and,
everybody.
have a good week. Good night.
Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.